Hello and welcome to the Silph Scope podcast. My name is Matt and I'm always joined with the Pokemon professor herself, Debbie Davis.
Hello. It's exciting to be here to talk about the Pokedex.
Yes. As you know, our Pokemon last week was a Rotom. You should all know this. I mean, it was so obvious to hear us cry and just know that was a Rotom. And the reason we chose Rotom is because every time in the new Sun and Moon games you open your Pokedex, you hear Rotom's cry because he is stuck inside the Pokedex. So this week...
Possessing the Pokedex.
He's possessing, yes. This week, we are going to be talking about the theories of the Pokedex and kind of what the Pokedex is. And I know that sounds boring, not exciting, like creatures attacking and fighting and the lore of whatever, but actually this is the most interesting theories that I have studied, and I'm excited to give you this episode.
We actually put a lot of hours into researching this because the more we found online, the more questions we had, and then the more questions we tried to answer. So it's actually really fascinating, really interesting. I'm really excited about this one.
I am. I could not sleep. No, I'm just kidding. It wasn't that severe, but it's pretty awesome. So just like all our other episodes so far, we're going to start off with a little story about the Pokedex that I wrote this week, so it's not going to be as awesome. But let's go ahead and start the epic story. Oh, wait, should we do a quick ball first?
Yeah, I'll go with the quick ball. So our quick ball today, I forgot to leave the sound. Oh, well.
Quick ball. I got it, go.
The largest regional Pokedex is the Kalos Regional Pokedex with 454 members. So that's quite large considering there are 700 and something. How many are there now with the new Sun and Moon?
I honestly didn't look that up.
Well, I'll have to look that up while you're telling the story.
Why did we not look that up for the Pokedex entry? All right. Well, cool. So Kalos is, of course, the 6th generation. Am I right?
Yeah.
No.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Yep. The one that's influenced by Paris. So that's really cool. That was also the one that had the most like fusion from like generation 1. So that was a really cool Pokedex.
So just for your information, there are 802 Pokemon now. So that's more than half.
802.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. That's good. That's a lot of Pokemon.
Yep.
All right. You ready for my story?
I'm ready for your story.
Epic story music. All right. Red woke up in a panic, and he looked at his clock. He's late! Today is supposed to be the day that Professor Oak gives all the kids in town a Pokemon. He rushes out of his house, nearly forgetting to put on clothes, and makes it to the lab. The professor is nowhere to be found. Discouraged, he began to walk back home. Not seeing where he was going, he accidentally walked into the tall grass. Out of nowhere, a Pokemon jumps at him, ready to attack. Luckily, Professor Oak saw Red walk into the grass and throws a Pokeball to catch it. Professor, with a panic look on his face, said, "Follow me back to the lab." And Red, looking with a sigh of relief, follows the professor back. In the lab, Red notices shelves and shelves of Pokemon books, of lore, of stories of legendary Pokemon, theories of the very first Pokemon, and then even some legends where people don't know what the Pokemon are called. Oak says to Red, "You can't go into the tall grass without a Pokemon. Luckily, you can have the Pikachu." Oh, the Pokemon. It was supposed to be Pokemon. I messed up there. The Pokemon I just captured. Red asks, "What is this Pokemon? I've never seen one like it before." Oak smirks and laughs with a chuckle. He says, "Well, let me show you. Hold this device up to it, and it will tell you what it is." Red held a strange handheld device in his hand. It looked like a computer of sorts. As he held it up to the Pokemon, the device began to speak. "Pikachu, the mouse Pokemon. When several of these Pokemon gather, it can cause a lightning storm." Red, in amazement, says, "That's amazing. How did the device know?" Oak says, "Red, that device is called the Pokedex. We humans live alongside Pokemon as friends, but yet we don't know everything about them. This is like an encyclopedia. It's a high-tech device that automatically records the Pokemon you encounter. I want you to have it and help uncover the mysteries behind the Pokemon by catching them and battling with them." Red, with a tear in his eyes, says, "Of course, Professor, I will help you," and sets out on his journey.
Wow.
That is the introduction to the Pokedex.
Isn't it?
Yep.
Isn't it wonderful?
Yeah. I think that's a good story. That's a good one. Yep.
Yeah.
That's a fusion of every single game
well done.
intro ever. Every single game intro ever mixed with the anime a little bit.
You always go through the same motion of, well, yeah, in most games, isn't it, that they're like, don't go into the tall grass without a Pokemon, and then you have to go and find the professor and then choose your Pokemon, which is always the hardest bit because you have to choose between 3 Pokemon, and it takes seriously hours for me to decide. But in Ruby and Sapphire and Omega Ruby and Omega Sapphire, I love that you have to go into the tall grass and then Professor Birch is being chased by a Poochyena, and then you have to choose your Pokemon. And you don't get given a Pokedex until a little bit later, but it's still very exciting.
Now, the reason I chose this as the story, Debbie, is because, one, I needed to have Professor Oak as the professor. Yeah. Why? Is because Professor Oak is the professor that invented the Pokedex. He is the one that created it. And his job, every professor has like a profession involving Pokemon, and Oak aims to be able to discover a way between humans and Pokemons to kind of make them have a successful life together. He wants it to work out. So that's his main focus in studies. And so he's the one that invented the Pokedex. And so the thing that I found it interesting, I added it into the story, is the phrase that they actually use in every single Pokemon game except for, I believe, Ruby and Sapphire. They say the phrase that this is like an encyclopedia. It's a high-tech device that automatically records the Pokemon you encounter. And that phrase, I think, is probably super key to kind of discovering what the Pokedex does and is and kind of what it came from. Yeah. Because automatically records already what the Pokemon you captured is. And so how does it automatically get that information is kind of like the way I was going in to find out what it does.
Yeah. I haven't looked too much about the mechanics of the Pokedex, but you'll see what I will talk about later, because I've been waiting for this. But it is something that all the professors, as you said, tell you, that it's an encyclopedia-like device that's going to tell you about the Pokemon. And in the games, which is a little bit different to the anime, if you encounter a Pokemon, you'll get certain data in your Pokedex, like the shadow outline or the silhouette of the Pokemon. But until you catch the Pokemon, you don't know the extra information, such as the Pokedex entry or its weight and its size and things like that. But in the anime, when Ash sees a Pokemon, it will tell him a little blurb about the Pokemon, such as the little Pokedex entry, even if he hasn't caught it.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's true. So that's something else I found interesting, is how come you don't get all the information until you catch it. And so kind of the approach I had before I go to there is I know this is like really rudimentary and like a common word. Like we all know what an encyclopedia is, right?
Yeah.
A book of information. So I decided I should just look up the definition of encyclopedia anyways.
Yeah.
And it says articles that focus on factual information concerning the subject for which the article is named. And so every time they reference a encyclopedia or that it's an encyclopedia, that means that all the information that is given is considered factual.
Yeah.
And concerning that subject. So I found that really interesting, is that even some of the really obscure stories that we are going to cover later with some of these Pokedex entries are considered factual inside the Pokemon universe. And I wanted to throw that to you because I had a one-up and knew what your theory is.
Yeah,
so
I know.
I just wanted to demolish that.
That's because I've been talking about it like for as long as I've known you, how I just don't think that the Pokedex is factual, and we're gonna discuss this. Yeah. And I spent a lot of time and effort on this, so I'm passionate about this subject.
Yes, and so that's my leeway to you, is why don't you think that the Pokedex is factual?
Okay. Well, just quickly, I'm going to run through some of the fan theories that suggest that the Pokedex may not be as factual as we think it is. And so some of those theories are that it was written for 10-year-olds, and 10-year-olds don't have a great comprehension of science and things like that. So the silly little things or whatever it talks about, hyperboles, were just so that children could kind of have some understanding or grasp on the Pokedex and the Pokemon that it talked about. The second one is that it's unscientific and it's mostly just founded on old wives' tales that are taught to children to keep them away from dangerous Pokemon and things like that. The third theory is that it's literal. This is what you are arguing, isn't it? It's literal, and the Pokemon world has a different set of physics and biology, which it does, doesn't it? Because I mean, they're shooting fire out of their mouths. It's not possible. Anyway, one of the interesting theories I found was that it's all a child's dream, and the Pokedex entries are written by their imagination. And that links into another one, which is that the Pokedex is written by the children who caught the Pokemon in the first place. So, like Red, he's a kid, and so he's just looking at it, and he's like, whoa, yeah, Slugma must be like 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit because it's really hot and made of lava. And it's wrong, but he's a 10-year-old, and he doesn't know any better.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are the main ones. And I think that I'm going towards it being unscientific and mostly founded on old wives' tales. I don't think it was written by 10-year-olds because we know, I just have to find his name. In one episode, we have a professor.
Of the anime, of the Pokemon anime?
In the Pokemon anime, it's called The Evolution Solution, and there's a Pokemon professor called Professor Westwood, and he lives in the Seafoam Islands, and that episode actually mentions that he wrote the Pokedex entries. So
okay, that's cool.
If
I did not know that.
wrote the Pokedex entries, they're not written by 10-year-olds, unless he was 10 at the time. Who knows? Maybe he was. But he is a professor, so, you know, I guess that kind of backs up what you're trying to say, which is that they're literal. However, what I have discovered or decided is that the Pokemon world is not in a different world to our world. So there are some examples, such as Poliwrath. The Pokedex entries for Poliwrath says that it has extremely tough muscles and it can keep swimming in the Pacific Ocean without resting. So unless they also have a Pacific Ocean, who knows, maybe they do. Parasect is mentioned that it was used in Chinese medicines, so that's China. Mew was found in Guyana. Lieutenant Surge is from America, so I think it's in our world.
You think Lieutenant Surge is from America? We don't know.
We don't know. But those are the Pokedex entries specifically, or in the case of Mew, the journal entries specifically mention that there are real world places that are in this world, and so I think that their physics, at least, should adhere to our world. So one of the theories about how Pokemon came to be is that it's much later after our life, and there was a nuclear apocalypse and that changed all the Pokemon and gave them magical powers and stuff like that. But if that happens, I can, we'll talk about that theory another day probably, but if that happens, that would change the biology and stuff, but it shouldn't change too many laws of physics because that's not what it affects.
Now, where that theory came from is interesting because didn't that theory kind of come from of like there's no more really adults anymore, like there was some sort of catastrophic event? Is that
I think that one, there's a couple of theories. So there's the theory that it was an atomic bomb or some cataclysmic event that kind of made lots of mutations and everything. And there's another one where it was a war and all the adults went to war and now there's only children and old people. But that only really applies if you're playing red and blue.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of different ages in the newer ones.
Yeah.
And also in the anime, there's I think in the third anime movie, the one with Celebi, you actually see Sam or Professor Oak when he's a young kid and how he was studying Pokemon like his whole life.
Yeah.
So that he kind of had like a consistent job throughout everything. He's always been fascinated by it. So
yeah. So
that's kind of something too.
Of course, there are those theories that are very interesting actually. But regardless, it's in our world. It should adhere to our physics. And this is going to be a very hard to explain theory because I'm trying to say, hey, no, this isn't physically possible when Pokemon themselves aren't physically possible. So
Yeah.
you've got to choose which ones you believe. Within the realm of the Pokemon world, some of them do not make sense.
Yes.
So, for example, Gardevoir and Duskull, I believe, are both said to have been able to create black holes. So Gardevoir can create black holes if it is trying to protect its user, and Duskull, if you look into the slit on its back of its shell, you can get sucked in. It's like as strong as a black hole. Now, black holes are so strong they can suck in light. So if for some reason a Gardevoir was getting scared that its partner was going to get obliterated or something, if it made a black hole, it would kill its partner and the rest of the world because it created a black hole. So that's just it. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't even make sense in the realm of Pokemon.
Well, I can counter that, but it becomes this weird thing about the Pokedex entries about Arceus, about how it's like the creator of the world. And so if he's this like god Pokemon, I mean, he can prevent things, right? Because he's all powerful. So like,
okay,
we can just bring that in, destroy science theory completely and just go with creationism.
But even under that, like, if Arceus made the world, no problem. I actually don't have a problem with that one. That still doesn't mean Gardevoir can create black holes and not obliterate the world. Unless Arceus is like, that Gardevoir's going to bank a black hole, I'm going to go
prevent the black hole from killing everything. I don't know. So, yeah, he could do that.
Maybe he can. Okay. I'll go with that.
If he's up in the clouds, if he's the godlike figure of Pokemon, for example, if we're going off of what normal Christianity believes today, if we're bringing it back to the real world talk, they believe in omnipotent being that's like in charge of everything, and can prevent things or do whatever. So if we give Arceus that role, we could just say that happened, and that's why the Pokemon universe is ridiculous and inconsistent. But I don't want to go with that theory. It's not as fun. It's not as fun. I can understand what you're saying because the black hole, like, we know it can suck stuff up. I mean, like, scientists have found in astrology and whatever that it will
astronomy
stuff goes missing.
Yeah, well, I mean, astronomy. That's it. Like,
you got it.
It sounds kind of like Professor Westwood, who apparently wrote these Pokedex entries, didn't fully understand his physics and didn't listen in class and was like, "Hey, that Gardevoir over there made a black ball, right? So maybe it made a black dark pulse or something. Can it learn dark pulse? I don't know." And was like, "Hey, that must be a black hole." And
true, I guess, like, that looks like a black hole. I'm going to call it a black hole because that's the way of understanding it. Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of with the Duskull, when you look inside it and it sucks you in like a black hole, that kind of sounds like something that somebody said to stop people from going near a Dusclops and looking inside it. So if he wrote that in more as a term of warning, I mean, he may not have written the ones for Hoenn, but either way, it still sounds like one of those old wives' tales that's told, like, don't go look inside a Duskull because you'll get sucked in because it has a black hole inside its body, meaning don't go near Duskull. They'll be really angry if you...
Or it could be, for example... Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, but it could be, for example, you know how things get lost in translation?
Yeah.
What if, let's say... Professor Westwood is studying these books over time, and he's like, weird, it said this happened when they went to a dusk school. How can I translate this to English so that everyone can understand? And so black hole's the easiest way to explain them going missing. Like, his back is like a black hole because they just went missing, when it could mean just a disappearance or like extreme disappearance or something like that. Because I'm sure translating from Japanese, the original games, to English might have those weird translations where it's best to use black hole, but in the Japanese language it means something else.
That's actually really interesting, and I really like that theory. That's really good. Because there are a lot of hyperboles or strangely used words in the Pokedex that could be explained by a mistranslation, or just, again, I still think it's, if you're talking about how a person disappeared because they went to a Dusclops and maybe the Dusclops just pulls it inside it and, dissolves it and uses it as an energy source. I don't know. But either way, it's still a warning more than a scientific fact about the Pokemon. So... There are a couple of things where it does sound like they're written as stories. So, Kadabra. This one is a bit funny, and its Pokedex entry in Fire Red is, "It happened one morning. A boy with extrasensory powers awoke in a bed transformed into a Kadabra." So that's a story.
That is weird, yeah.
Like,
yeah,
unless there was a specific point in history which it's like, hey, we remember those, it's still not a scientific fact. It doesn't tell you much about Kadabra. Also, what's weird about it is that Kadabra is an evolved form of Abra, and the boy turned into a Kadabra, not an Abra. So that's a bit strange, I think.
I guess. I don't know. I don't really understand human transformation too much.
I don't understand human transformation. There are a few Pokedex entries, especially with ghosts, which talk about them having been humans before, which I don't know. I don't have a problem with that. But in this case, what's really weird about it is that it turned into a Kadabra, not an Abra that evolved into a Kadabra.
Well, I mean, if you want to get technical, though, there is someone that was researching how to, or kind of figuring out Pokemon, Bill, and he actually got turned into a Pokemon as well. I forget which one it was.
Yeah,
but
that's
he got
true.
turned into a Pokemon.
Well, I don't have a problem with them turning into Pokemon. I think that could be... I mean, we saw it happen with Bill, didn't we? Which is pretty cool. And we can... One day we'll go into how Pokemon and humans are connected and can turn into one another, because lots of the ghosts seem to have been humans at one point. But in this case, it does still seem like it is written as it was a story. Like some kind of myth.
I mean, like, for example, you have one here about Drifloon in Pokemon Sun, and it literally says the word story in it. It says, "Stories go that it grabs the hands of small children and drags them away to the afterlife. It dislikes heavy children." So that says, that's straight up. Like, stories say this. And so that just goes to show that they don't know too much about that Pokemon. That's why Professor Oak wants you to search for the Pokedex, because if they had all the information, the Pokedex was able to tell you everything, there'd be no point for you going out there. And so that kind of leads more into my theory of kind of what the Pokedex is. When I was researching this, what I did is I literally watched the intro of every single Pokemon game and like dissected each word that every single professor said as they gave you. Oh, my microphone's going weird. Sorry. That they said to you as soon as they gave you the Pokedex. Yeah, I know. I was just messing around. But this is kind of part of my research. So Professor Elm in Pokemon Silver, he's in charge of. He's the discovery of like breeding Pokemon, but when you receive the Pokedex, you get it from Professor Oak again. And Professor Oak says, "We don't know everything about them yet," talking about Pokemon. There are still many mysteries to solve. He also says that I study Pokemon every day. And so a recent discovery they had in Pokemon Silver was the ability that Pokemons lay eggs, breeding. And Pokemon have been around since Professor Oak was a tiny kid, but yet they just barely discovered that they could breed. So that means they're able to collect more Pokemon to be able to do that. And it started leading me to another question. That question being, what came first, the Pokeball or the Pokedex? Is a Pokeball afterwards of the Pokedex, where the Pokedex is invented, but then they had to invent this thing to be able to gather the data. So they made a small computer device inside of the Pokeball. So when you capture it, it's able to disintegrate the Pokemon into some sort of data and bring it to the PC. I mean, that's why Bill's so important in the first one.
But then the Pokedex, which came first, the Pokedex or the computer? The PC.
Well, the computer. Again, true. Like the Pokedex could be the very first computer, and the PC was built off of that.
Yeah, but
to be able to store things.
Did the Pokeball come before the PC? In which case, it was being converted into data, and then they're like, "Hey, because it's been converted into data, we could probably store it in a PC as well."
Yeah, I'm sure that's what happened. Like the reason I say this is we have many examples with Professor Oak studying the Pokemon even more in the anime with Ash. Ash caught a Krabby. I don't know if you remember this episode, but it's when Ash catches a Krabby and the Pokeball goes missing. It disappears out of Ash's hands, and all of a sudden Professor Oak calls him like, "Hey, did you just catch a Pokemon? You're only allowed to hold 6 at a time." And he's like, "Can I see my Krabby?" And he shows this massive one. He's like, "Oh, Krabby's so big." And he's like, "Oh, sorry, that's Gary's." And it shows his. It's all really tiny and scrawny and not as awesome. And Ash gets all sad.
So who regulates this when you... So obviously with Ash, when he caught the Krabby, and that meant he had too many Pokemon, and it just automatically went away to Professor Oak. But are there people who will be like, I'm going to carry around 7 Pokeballs, and does Nurse Jenny come along and be like, that's illegal, you get fined. You're not allowed to carry more than 6 Pokemon.
Well, we only know the stories of Pokemon from very select towns. So we got Pallet Town, and Professor Oak is kind of like the... I want to say like town captain or town mayor, the mayor of the town. And so he's in charge of giving all the children in that town Pokeballs and Pokemon. And so that would then be their home base where the Pokemon go back to him. Same with all the other games. Like you got Professor Elm, he's the one that looks at your Pokemon. We got Professor Burst, he looks at your Pokemon and so on and so forth. They tell you this stuff. And so kind of like a home base, for instance, for each trainer. Like I guess they start in Pewter City, maybe Brock is the Pokemon guy in charge and he's the one collecting people's Pokemon at his house and they're taking care of it there. That's why he's so interested in breeding, because he's kind of the person that's into that section. Yeah. That's just my personal opinion. That could be it. That's what the regulation is like set jurisdictions or rules of like the starter person.
Yeah.
But
I want to know what happens if you do carry more than 6.
Well,
and it seems to be carrying, because you're allowed to hold them. Like all the Pokemon breeders and farmers and stuff obviously have more than 6 Pokemon, but you're just not allowed to carry more than 6 that you're going to use in battle.
That's true. I don't understand that rule too often. That's something we're going to have to look more into.
Okay.
So
anyway, back to the Pokedex. Question.
Back to my theory about this though is like, I really think that the Pokeball is a hand-in-hand thing with the Pokedex. That's the thing that stores the data, and then that's what the Pokedex then scans the data received, and whatever data, let's say, what was that guy's name? Professor Westwood?
Yeah.
That was his name, Westwood?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool. Whatever data he put in there, let's say, for example, he puts the story of Raichu, like Raichu did this, and I'm just going to type that in here. I don't really know what a Raichu looks like, but these are his characteristics. It's yellow, brown, whatever. The Pokeball's data then scans it, and it matches up like a system like Google, and it's like, oh, this is a brown whatever mouse. This must be a Raichu, and it tells you that little story about Raichu, and then that gives them the opportunity to be able to study the Pokemon more. That's why every generation, the Pokedex is updated. Like in generation 2, it's like, this is the updated version of the Pokedex.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, cool. I don't know. That's just my personal opinion so far, or theory, is that they're still learning it. We just know or stories.
Well, see, that's again one of the things that I think of why the Pokedex isn't entirely literal is their technology is way, way more advanced than ours, and that's pretty obvious to see in the fact that they have Pokeballs and being able to store them in PCs and all the stuff they did with Mewtwo and everything. That technology is awesome, but their biology is pretty poor, I think. So I think the opposite of what happened with our current timeline, where we learned more biology first and we had a technological boom after that. Yeah. It happened the opposite way around. So they had a technological boom. Maybe they focused more on physics and technology and engineering, and then had a biological boom after that, which they are hopefully going to get to soon. And so because they're still in the rudimentary stages of biology, I think maybe that's why they don't really understand, and there are a lot of things and gaps in their understanding of biology which they fill with stories, which is what we have been doing for centuries, and why we have all these stories, such as, back hundreds of years ago when we thought if someone had a headache, it was because there were demons inside their head and things like that, and that was their explanation because they didn't understand the biology. And I feel like that's what the Pokedex is.
And I can agree with that for a lot of things, because they just lack the understanding of what to call certain things or what to say or just like stories in general. Like for example, not to get back onto the religious topic, but like if everyone knows about the Bible, in there's some like extremely strange stories because it's supposedly written by or is written by whatever you believe, like prophets or whatever, people that wrote stuff down. There's like a part where this guy sees like a pillar of fire come down from the sky and like these weird things, whatever. And maybe he didn't have like a light bulb or whatever. So maybe that's the best way for him to explain what happened according to back then. Or if you want,
exactly.
know what I'm saying?
And
so
I think
they're trying to explain things in a certain way.
They're currently limited by their lack of knowledge. So they're using other explanations that aren't biological to explain those phenomenon, and they will learn. So some of the Pokedex entries are from Pokemon maybe that they've studied a little bit more of, and so they are accurate. And some of them are from Pokemon maybe that are rarer. So, for example, with Absol, I think it is, and they talk about how Absol shows up when there's a disaster. And so for a long time, people thought it was bringing the disaster, but it was actually just warning people of the disaster. So they learnt that it was the opposite way around, and so they changed their thinking about it. And some of the Pokedex entries that has happened with, and some of them are before that, where they need to gain more knowledge. Yeah,
of course. And so that's kind of what we agree on that point.
Yeah,
exactly.
I do definitely think that. And there are lots of, so see, for example, Aegislash in X and Y, in Y actually, its Pokedex entry is, apparently, it can detect the innate qualities of leadership. According to legend, whoever it recognizes is destined to become king. So that is not a scientific entry in any way whatsoever. That's talking about that also, legend.
It's a really nice callback to
it's really
King
cute.
Arthur.
I really like it. I really love
it's a
how
really
a lot
nice
of these
callback
things
to King Arthur.
have,
That's just saying that King Arthur's Excalibur sword is an Aegislash.
Yeah. In fact, I have a point about I can never say this guy's name. Escavalier, is that how you say it? It's like escargot and cavalier, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
They fly around at high speed, striking with their pointed spears. It has a base speed of 20, which is the same speed as a Wurmple.
Yeah.
So it doesn't fly around at high speed.
Yeah.
So
I don't get it. That's weird.
Yeah. So again, it seems like one of those things where they haven't necessarily put all the data together or analyzed it or something like that, and their explanation is, well, it flies around at high speed because it flies around faster than a human because they can't fly.
That's true. Or maybe they're just getting it like confused where they were riding ponitas and jousting back in like medieval times. Like, oh, they must go really fast.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. I think there are a lot of entries where that kind of seems like, I mean, obviously with the very, very popular one of Magcargo.
Which one?
Magcargo. I have to look this up because apparently I didn't write it down. But Magcargo is the snail that is made of lava.
Yeah.
Mag. It's a very popular one of, I can't even find this thing. It's a very popular one of showing why the Pokedex seems like a hyperbole, or they just haven't been able to explain properly what it is. But in Sapphire, for example, it says that Magcargo's body temperature is 18,000 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what that is in Celsius. But anyway.
I don't know either.
That is almost twice the temperature of the surface of the sun.
Yeah.
So
that means our planet would be destroyed.
Yeah, exactly. So again, it just seems like one of those things where they're like, it's really hot. It must be hotter than the sun.
So that's just like a comment of like some like redneck person would say, like, oh, that's hotter than the sun. Get
yeah, exactly. That's almost it's almost 10,000 degrees Celsius. So yes,
that's a lot.
It's very, very, very hot. And I think that it is because they haven't gone up to a Magcargo and been like, okay, let's get your temperature gauge. So they're just like, it's really hot. It must be 10,000 degrees Celsius.
And that's why I'm really for the theory of that they're still like you said, that they're still studying these Pokemon, that they're finding a way and getting more. Because as you can tell, the Pokedex entries from the very first game, Red and Blue, seem to be kind of like the first Pokemon that are being researched, because that was Professor Oak's area. And gradually over time, their Pokedex entries have gotten better.
Yeah, a little bit more accurate, or...
Yeah, like Cubones in Sun and Moon. I don't have it on here, but it says like Cubone cries so much that it gets... that the Mandibuzz hear it and try to attack it. And so that's probably a true statement.
Yeah,
like that's like way far past.
Yeah, it's definitely not the legend of it wearing its mother's skull.
Yeah, it's now a kind of a nature of what Cubone actually does, and it's like natural habitat.
Yeah.
While the newly discovered Pokemon, for example, are totally different. With we'll go into Araquanid. It says, despite what its appearance suggests, it cares for others. It finds others' Pokemon, it protectively brings them back into the water bubble. Or it says it delivers headbutts with a water bubble on its head. Small Pokemon get stuck into the bubble where they drown. And so it's like contradicting each other. Or it's extremely dark.
Yeah.
And
well, I guess it depends if it's protecting vulnerable water Pokemon. But killing...
Or it's... Yeah.
Other non-water Pokemon that can't breathe underwater.
But that brings another point, is that those are... apparently the same time period, but two different Pokedex entries for both games. And that's another thing, is why is that?
Yeah. So
it's because of why? Why do you think it's like that?
Why do I think it's different?
Yeah.
I can't answer that. I haven't thought about it. I don't know. I had never actually thought about why they were different. I just kind of thought it was because a different person was writing the entry.
Alternate dimensions.
Mic drop.
Yeah, you know why? Because that's what the Sun and Moon is all about, is alternate dimensions. Spoiler alert, you go through a wormhole and you end up in a world exactly like yours, but yet it's a different time of day. It's 12 hours difference. So the Sun version is a different world than the Moon version, but yet it's the same. So it's just an alternate universe, an alternate timeline. So they have different facts. One is a carrying Pokemon in one world. One is a Pokemon that drowns and kills things.
But that would mean that when you trade Pokemon from one game, like an exclusive Pokemon from one to the other, it's like trans-dimensional trading.
Yeah. Yeah.
But see, I don't actually think those two Pokedex entries are contradictory. Again, it could be...
but yeah, they're different enough, because one makes it seem extremely nice and one makes it seem extremely
But
bad.
That's because it only has two sentences written about it. Like, if this was a proper encyclopedia, it might have two separate paragraphs where it's like, it is generally a caring Pokemon. However, if it's feeling very, very threatened, or it has a natural enemy in a certain habitat or something, it will headbutt that Pokemon that it is fighting with, and that Pokemon will be sucked in and it's drowned if it's threatening its territory or something like that. They don't have to be contradictory. There's not enough information about them to know whether they're contradictory or not.
Because they're a newer Pokemon, for sure. But they're different. Like, why with the same device that's given to you or me have two separate different entries, we would all have the same first sentence? You know what I'm saying? Like, if I got a 2016 World Encyclopedia and you bought a 2016 World Encyclopedia and we both looked up Australia, you know, what does it say about Australia? That place sucks, you know what I'm saying? And
it's really hot.
Just kidding.
That's what mine would say. Yeah. We had like a whole week of above 40 degrees, and so it's very hot at the moment.
Yeah, it's 40 degrees Celsius, everybody that's in America. But yeah, but my encyclopedia wouldn't say like Australia is really cold. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It would say, it should, if it's the same copy or whatever, it would say the same exact thing. So
yeah, but that means that the Pokedexes aren't the same copy. You can get,
that means it's in an alternate timeline.
Well, no, not entirely. Because we have multiple. That's like saying that we only have one set of encyclopedias in our world. We don't have more than one set of encyclopedias. And obviously we do. Like, if you go and look at something in a book encyclopedia and then you look on Wikipedia, they're going to say two different things.
Yeah, but to contradict your theory again is you get it from the same professor named the same person, Professor Kui. It's the Rotom Dex, and then Professor Oak says the same exact things in both versions, saying, "Hey, I helped make this Pokedex." And you're like, "Oh, cool! So it's the same exact Pokedex, but why is it different? Because it's an alternate timeline."
But is it the same exact Pokedex? He might say the same thing and still giving us a different version.
But it's at the same time. Like the events are the same, in my opinion. But it's. Yeah,
no, I guess a really good example of being in an alternate universe then would be Ruby and Sapphire, whereas one you fight Team Magma and the other one Team Aqua. But they're supposed to be at the same time.
But then again, if you go to Emerald, it's like a fusion of both worlds because you're fighting both of them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the real timeline here?
Yeah, because
that's another thing we had talked about.
Black and White and Black 2 and Black White 2 are chronological, but like Black and White are opposite and Black 2 and White 2 are opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. One's in the past, one's in the future.
Yeah.
So that's a different timeline.
Okay.
It's that's why the Pokedex entries
can
change from...
if they are a different timeline, they still don't, those two don't have to be contradictory statements, so I still maintain that they're not necessarily contradictory, even if they're in alternate.
Sure.
So, back to what you said Pokedex. About the earlier games having Pokedex entries that get upgraded in later games. So I've got another example of this, which is in Red and Blue and Yellow, when they talk about Doduo, they say that he... a bird that makes up for its poor flying with its fast foot speed and its short wings make flying difficult. Instead, this Pokemon runs at high speed on developed legs, and there's nothing wrong with that. But then in Generation 2, in Crystal, it actually starts to say that it lives on a grassy plain where it can see a long way. If it sees an enemy, it can run at 60 miles per hour. So it seems that because that is a little bit later in the timeline, they've actually now measured the speed of the Doduo, whereas they didn't know that before. And again, like you have those entries, and then in Sapphire, it says a scientific study reported that on rare occasions there will be examples of this Pokemon possessing sets of different brains. So they've added a little bit more information once they get to Sapphire. Then in Pearl, the two brains and its two heads appear to communicate emotions to each other with telepathic power. So they're adding information on information on information the more they get. So that's why, another reason why I think it's that they're still in the early stages of their understanding of biology and they're trying to build up that knowledge base.
Yeah.
And so some things don't make sense because they haven't explained them.
Exactly. And another pure example of this actually is the Pokemon noise we used last week, Rotom. In the TV show, Ash catches a Rotom, and Professor Oak actually hangs out with the Rotom a lot, and they end up talking a lot. And for those who don't know what Rotom is, it's like a ghost electric Pokemon. It's like looks like a light bulb, but it's like the only Pokemon that possesses like items we'd be familiar with. Like it could be a lawnmower and gain the attributes of a lawnmower, or a refrigerator, or an oven, or a dish. It was a washing machine. Yeah. And that's cool, but it seems like as Professor Oak hung out with the Rotom, it then is like, hey, what if we built you this device that you could get in, a Pokedex, and you could help us out with that? And then there comes the Rotom Dex. So they learned more of the Pokemon, and he was able to then say like, hey, we can actually use you in our everyday life. And the Rotom was like, yeah, heck yeah, I want to do that. I want to be a Pokedex. But that raises another question. The Rotom Dex ruins a lot of things because now it's a Pokemon that's bringing up the information for you. But don't you think the Pokemon would have a say like, oh, I've met this Pokemon, or I've seen this, or since my Pokemon feelers are out there and I'm actually one of these creatures, don't you think this would actually is false information? Or, that's why I'm upset.
Well, no, because so when a Rotom possesses an electronic item, it picks up the traits of that item. So if it gets into a refrigerator, it changes to ice, doesn't it? Ice? Yeah. So it picks up those traits. Whereas if it goes into a Pokedex, it's only going to pick up the extent to which the Pokedex has the knowledge. And even with its like it learns to talk, right? But because the Pokedex talks to you, like Ash's Dexter always talks to him and stuff. But that doesn't mean that it knows extra stuff or it even has the capabilities to talk about knowledge outside of what is featured in the Pokedex.
I guess I can get behind that. I'm just so upset because I just wanted to be like, hey, when I met Entei, it was like, whoa, Entei's red.
Do you want to hear something controversial, actually? I did not like that it spoke to me. I liked it for about 2 sentences, and then it just got annoying because it kept on telling me, it was so passive-aggressive. It was like, hey, why don't you go and do this thing now? Hey, why don't you go and do this thing now? I know you're not doing it. Go and do it. And I was like, shut up. I don't want you to tell me what to do. I am going clothes shopping, and you cannot stop me.
It's helpful for those. It's a video game, and so I understand why they made that design, but we don't need to get into the video game.
Yeah.
Because it was for basic people that already don't do everything right away. Yeah. So it's like, hey, do you remember where you were? Let's go head out to this gym.
Yeah, every time I'm buying clothes. Leave me alone. Anyway, yeah. So there are a lot of... Okay, so I have a couple of Pokedex entries, again, that don't really make sense. For example, Palisand, which is a really great pun. I like it. Anyway.
Palisand, yeah.
Apparently, this is in Sun or Moon, I can't remember which one. Buried beneath the castle are masses of dried up bones from whose vitality it has drained. So that's really dark and creepy, and I like it. I think that's great.
Yes.
But does that mean that Palosan can't move because it has to carry its bones with it? Or does it carry its bones with it, and so when you throw it out of its Pokeball onto a mountain, its bones go in the ground in the mountain?
That just goes to show about the new Pokemon. These are the newest Pokemon, so they don't have the most information on it.
Oh, okay. Good one.
So it's like a legend, like it's exactly that, a legend. Like,
yeah.
It reminds me, for some reason, that Pokedex entry reminds me a lot of Aladdin. You know, the weird cave that had the mouth, and like Aladdin goes in to get the magic lamp.
Yeah.
Reminds me of that, where like someone might have popped their head in there once, like, this is freaking me out. I swear I saw bones down there. Like, he got dared or whatever and freaking out. So, I mean, that's probably where that came from.
Well, it might be one of those things where they do drain people. And if they like to hang out on the beach until they're caught, and if they prefer to stay in one place until they're caught, then maybe they do keep the bones under where they sit for most of the time.
Well, if they actually drain people, or people just, go inside the mouth and get lost. Maybe it's not draining them, but they're just having fun.
And they eventually die.
They just die themselves. Or they feel like their vitality is getting drained because the sun's beating down on them and they forgot to put on sunscreen, so they're just exhausted afterwards. Like, man, that pile of sand totally draining me, but it's just the sun. They just don't understand.
I have to admit that when I first saw Palo Sand, I thought it looked really dumb because I just saw the design, and then I read the Pokedex entry and stuff, and I was like, this is dark and creepy, because we grow up thinking when we're kids, oh, yay, let's go to the beach and build a sandcastle, and it's such a childish thing, and then it becomes this dark, possessed thing where it eats you.
I just thought of something live to you guys now. It's not that, like, what if, hear me out, you know how it's common to, like, bury, like, as a kid, you, like, bury your dad and his, like, face sticks out of the sand, or, like, not your dad, but, like, that's, like, a common thing in the movies,
not when
or whatever.
they're dead, when they're alive.
Yeah, when they're alive.
Yeah. And their head sticks out of the sand.
Or, like, a kid. Yeah, and you're like, oh, how cool. What if, like, someone did that, and then, like, something bad happened, or, like, they forgot about them, or they got buried all the way, and then they just were forgotten about. Like, they saw a homeless bum sleeping, and they, like, buried him, and then they forgot about him, and he died. And then, like, since he's a ghost Pokemon, and ghost Pokemon used to be human souls, he just comes back as a pile of sand.
Wow.
And that's why they'll find bones underneath there, is because he died there.
And that's quite creepy. I was actually, when you started saying it, I was imagining, so they buried their dad and his head is sticking out of the sand. And then, in Pokemon, how if someone's running from the distance, you see that cloud of dust. And so I just imagine this cloud of dust coming closer and closer, and then this pile of sand like running or moving along the sand, and then just like gulping the dad's head in its mouth.
Yeah, that's cool. But I mean, like, I was just going off of the typing. It's like ghost ground. So maybe the person died in the sand, and that's where they find skeletons later. They just died prior. Anyways, that's my morbid theory. I seem to do one every single episode. So
I like the morbidity. So I have another one that doesn't make sense and sounds like it's because it's a rudimentary form they don't really understand. This is grima. So sludge exposed to X-rays from the moon transformed into grima, and it loves feeding on filthy things. So lots of Pokemon have come alive from man-made objects like Voltorb and Electrode, obviously, have both come from Pokeballs that somehow mutated into Pokemon, and there are lots of them. But this one is weird because it says X-rays that come from the moon, and the moon does emit X-rays. But it is the lowest producer of X-rays in of celestial bodies that aren't made from Earth, like X-ray machines and things like that. But also, the X-rays are blocked by the Earth's atmosphere, and so the people who study X-rays that come from space and stuff, they have to use satellites because they can't even use balloons that go up into the atmosphere because they don't get high enough for the X-rays to even penetrate that low of the atmosphere. So they are not going to get to Earth. So it seems like there was some sort of mutation, and maybe it happened at night, and so their only form of explanation was maybe it's X-rays from the moon. But it may have just been a coincidence, and there was some other event that caused them to mutate, but it happened at nighttime.
Weird, yeah.
So, strange story about grima. It really reminds me of when I was little. I used to watch a My Little Ponies movie, and it had this big purple sludge stuff called the Smooze, and it like took over the castle where the My Little Ponies live, and I always thought that was a grima.
Hey,
yeah,
I wouldn't doubt it. That sounds cool.
So if you watch that My Little Ponies movie with the Smooze in it, that's a muck and a grima. And even like, because it was this big like wave of purple sludge, and then it had eyes and stuff, and so it would like come up, and it very much looked like a grima. Anyway, so there's a bit of a crossover.
There you go.
Maybe My Little Ponies are actually ponytails and monsters.
There you go. There you go. I like that.
Yeah. So another one that is really popular that I read all the time whenever anyone talks about non-scientific Pokedex entries is Whale Lord. Have you read the Whale Lord density things? Yeah.
Yes.
So I spent so long trying to figure this out because I have not done physics in a really, really, really long time. But it's to do with the density of a Whale Lord and how it's impossible to dive. So it's really common. So I looked up the Pokedex entry of the Whale Lord, and it says its height is 14 meters. I think that probably means its length, not its height, because that's really, really, that's 50. If it's 14 meters in...
It's counting its tail as its feet.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's what I'm trying to go with. And that is okay because that's about the length of a sperm whale. A sperm whale is between 12 to 16 meters. And it is about 3 meters high and 2.5 meters wide.
Okay.
14 meters is still pretty big. I found a fun fact, and it would take Usain Bolt 5.5 seconds to run the length of a Whale Lord. So, there we go.
Cool.
Yeah, so based on that, based on the height, length, and width of the sperm whale, because it's about the same size as a Whale Lord, I found its approximate volume, which is 113 meters cubed. Based on the shape of a Whale Lord being a capsule. I learned so much about physics in this episode. I had forgotten all that geometry of how to find areas and volumes. But hey, I used it in real life. So kids, go to school, learn your geometry, because one day you'll need to use it.
Yes, if you're Debbie. Or you can be like me and fail geometry 5 times. So that's
geometry's awful, but I have used it. I also used it in Minecraft once, so it's there you
go.
It's legit.
Go you.
So the weight of a Whale Lord is 398.4 kgs. A sperm whale is 15,000 kgs. So quite a big difference. The density.
So what is it filled of?
What, a whale lord or a sperm whale?
The whale lord, yeah.
Yeah, so what is it filled with? Because according to that, its density is 0.3 kgs per meter squared, cubed, sorry. And the density of water is 997 kgs per meter squared. So the way that things work with physics, the lower density it is, the more to the top that object will be. So with air, it's 1.2 kgs per meter cubed, which means that the whale lord has a lower density than air and should be floating on top of the air. So it's not even made of air, it's made of something that's lighter than air.
Well, that would make sense of why we can cast them without water in the game.
Yeah, because they'll float. But apparently they dive into the water and stuff, and they can't. That's like, when you try and force a balloon below water. Did you ever do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like everyone's done it. Or force the beach ball below the water. You can't. And you can't even do it with air, so it makes no sense whatsoever. None.
Huh.
So again, I think
weird.
it's just because they went and they were like, a whale lord, it looks really big. Maybe they could make an estimation of its height or its length pretty easily. But they were like, 398 kgs, that sounds like a big number. Let's go with that.
Or there's this whole other universe we just don't know about yet. Because what if we don't have enough knowledge? Maybe what if Whale Lord is you remember how we were talking about the theory about the wars earlier?
Yeah.
Whale Lord is the Zeppelins.
Yeah, but see, even if they are Zeppelins, they can't. I have no problem with them floating in air, but then how
But they
can
can't
they
learn
dive?
to move fly.
Yeah, they should be able to learn fly. Maybe they just float. Hey, you know what? Maybe they're like, there's the whale lord, and that's the blimp bit. It's the Zeppelin bit. And then there's a mantine, because they can come out and fly too, a little bit. And then it sticks onto the bottom, and it's like the engine of the whale lord. And so the whale lord sits on top of the mantine or any other flying type Pokemon, and then flies around. And it does the direction and the speed.
Exactly. We found it. We solved it.
Yeah, we've solved that one.
But no, that's just goes to show that one hasn't been fixed yet, has it? It has Sun and Moon.
But it's not the only Pokemon where the density is so ridiculous. Like, apparently Onyx, its density is lower than polystyrene, or the same as polystyrene or something, but it's made of rocks. So it just seems like they haven't gone around and done very much weighing, and even with some of their heights, they seem a bit funny. But specifically, their weights are very, very off.
That's interesting. That is interesting. So, what's the conclusion for the Pokedex theory? We feel that
dumb.
The Pokedex.
That's mine.
That's what?
It's dumb.
That's what?
It's just not. It's too rudimentary. It's based on a lot of legends and myths and hyperboles because they haven't gotten to the place where their research is accurate enough yet.
Or this is my conclusion, is that when they tell you in the beginning of the games that we don't know everything about Pokemon yet and we need your help, that you are literally helping them, because every single game that's progressively happened after the first one, the Pokedex entries have gotten better. So that is on the instance your hero did capture those monsters, got the Pokedex, and now they have more information. And so you are helping and updating and helping it move on their research as a player. And
so you are a scientist.
You are a scientist. You are a Pokemon professor.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure in the next game, Professor Oak will be dead, and Red's just like, ... I'm the professor. And you're like, all right.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I like that.
Or Gary. Gary's the professor.
Gary.
Let's go with that one.
With all his swooning ladies.
Yeah, I could see that.
Well, why doesn't Professor Kukui have swooning ladies?
He does. He's married.
Well, he's married. He can still have... he never wears a shirt. He's quite attractive for a professor. I'm not going to deny that. I'd do one of his swooning ladies.
Yeah, that's cool.
Don't deny that you
I'm all
won't.
about that.
You would.
I'm all about that
totally
Professor Juniper. I'm all about the Professor Juniper.
Yeah, so that's what it seems like. It seems like right now they don't have enough information and they're using 10-year-olds, because that seems like a good idea, to gather more information and learn more about Pokemon. And the Pokedex is getting upgraded because of that extra knowledge.
Well, if you think about it, they've done a good job by getting those 10-year-olds because they get them hyped to be able to have their own pet or creature to be able to grow closer with. And so they're like, hey, we're going to give you a Pokemon. You're going to be really excited. And then you get to go on an adventure and catch these other Pokemon. And little do you know, we're actually going to be doing experiments and researching the Pokemon you catch and send back to us. So there's the dark side right there.
Yeah,
it's like,
it's
oh,
basically
yeah, your
free
Pokemon all
Lego.
dies. Yeah, that's why when you don't use them, they're not happy when they come back. You have to like treat them nice to make them like you. And then sometimes if you put them far away, they kind of hate you a little bit more. It's because the professor's just doing cruel experiments. They're like, how come you're treating me like this?
Don't do this. Yeah, so Pokemon is dark.
Yeah, it's
That's what we'll
creepy.
conclude.
It's spooky. But that concludes our episodes, guys. Before we end all the way, I want to thank all those who left a review for the podcast. Make sure to be able to hit that subscribe button on iTunes and leave a review on iTunes. It helps us out a ton and helps us be able to be spotted as you type in Silph or type in Pokemon. We'll be able to be up there. And so if you listen to the podcast, please leave us a review. It helps us out a lot. And then Debbie, is there anything, where can they find you? Have you made a Twitter account yet?
No, I will one day. If you want to learn a little bit about science, a little bit more about science, and I've used Pokemon to explain concepts of science in our world, you can go onto WordPress and look up Dubious Caesar. That's DOOBIUSCAESAR. And I have a few articles that just have a couple of interesting things about science, such as symbiotic relationships, and I use Pokemon as examples to explain that concept.
That's awesome. And if you want to find me, just follow me on the Twitter. My Twitter handle is @NuzlockeMatty, NUZLOCKE, Matty, MATTY. And yeah, and before we go, who's this Pokemon?